Before we dive into this episode, I just want to quickly point out that effective January 1st, 2026, federal estate, gift, and generation skipping transfer tax exemptions increased to $15 million per individual. But we actually recorded this episode in 2025 when those exemptions were still $13.99 million per individual. So when we reference the 2025 exemptions as current law during this episode, please remember that it was recorded before the 2026 increases took place. Hope you enjoy. Today, I'm joined by Farella associate Lucy Campbell to discuss the movie Batman Begins. Join me and Lucy as we explore the streets of Gotham City. Along the way, Lucy and I discuss directed trusts, contingent trust beneficiaries, powers of appointment, and some highlights from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. What are some common reasons for directed trusts? How might Bruce Wayne's butler, Alfred Pennyworth, inherit the entire Wayne family fortune? Equally important, what are Lucy's and my thoughts on some of Batman's gadgets? We explore these questions and more, because death is not considerate or fair. Welcome to The Verdict, Estate Planning Through Film, brought to you by the Private Client Group at Farella, Braun, and Martel. I'm Hans Young, a family wealth partner at Farella. Through this podcast, my guests and I will provide an entertaining look at family wealth and estate planning topics through well-known Hollywood movies. Each episode will focus on a single movie as we discuss fun facts, review our favorite scenes, and engage in thought-provoking discussions of real-world legal issues. And lastly, do you agree with our verdict? Is the movie a guilty pleasure or just not guilty? Again, welcome to The Verdict, Estate Planning Through Film. I'm excited to have my colleague Lucy Campbell as my guest on the podcast today. As an associate in Farella's Family Wealth Group, Lucy counsels individuals and families on sophisticated estate and tax planning, estate and trust administration, business succession planning, and charitable planning. Her practice touches upon the full spectrum of income, gift, estate, and property tax laws as she guides clients through wealth transfer and financial planning strategies and lifetime gifting options. Lucy, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Hans. I'm happy to be here today. Thanks for having me.
I know we've been trying to record this episode for a long time now, but I've had to delay it for a number of reasons. I think Bruce Wayne trained to become Batman in less time than it took us to get to this episode. So certainly excited that we're finally here. I want to hear about your connection to this movie because you certainly were quick to suggest this one when we were going through movie ideas. So before we get to that, let's get started with some fun facts about the movie. So it released 20 years ago, which is hard to believe, on June 15th, 2005. It was a box office success. It grossed $375 million worldwide on a budget of $150 million. Directed by Christopher Nolan. All movie lovers will know his name very well and his movies. He's known for his cerebral, often non-linear storytelling. This movie really supercharged his career and made him a household name. His later films, of course, we know they include Inception, Interstellar, Dunkirk, Oppenheimer, just to name a few. Perhaps even more importantly than its box office success, Batman Begins also achieved critical acclaim, and along with its sequels, you had The Dark Knight in 2008, The Dark Knight Rises in 2012. Batman Begins is credited with restoring widespread popularity to the Batman character and the franchise, which after the Michael Keaton-led Batman and Batman Returns in 89 and 92, those are the ones I grew up on. And I guess you can kind of throw a nod to the Val Kilmer-led Batman Forever in 95. The franchise actually, kind of hit a low point. In many's opinion, you had George Clooney's Batman and Robin in 1997, just not well received by fans, by audiences. And so basically this franchise and the Batman character, on the big screen at least, sat dormant until Christopher Nolan revived it with Batman Begins. Batman is and was my favorite superhero as a kid. When the Michael Keaton one released in 1989, I saw it in theaters twice on the exact same day. I think it's one of, 2 or 3 movies I've done that with. And I think that was the first time I'd done it. It's sort of easy to forget now, but with so many superhero movies over the past 17 years or so, right? The Marvel Cinematic Universe, starting with Iron Man, I think that was in 2008. So around the time that Batman Begins came out, right, it started this whole superhero craze. But It's easy to forget now, but there was a lot of excitement for the 1989 Batman. And so Batman is the superhero with the most movies in the genre, in the superhero genre. So I think it currently stands at number 14. There was even a Lego Batman movie in 2017. So certainly I'm not alone in liking him as a superhero character. I think it resonates with audiences because he's, fundamentally human. He's got no inherent superpowers, right? Ironically. And his accomplishments are mainly achieved through, training, intellect, sheer determination. It helps that he has a lot of money. Also, probably just looking at what he represents on screen kind of represents the potential in all of us to face and overcome our fears and push back against a very dark world, which is how Gotham City is typically depicted. When did you watch this movie for the first time? And what's your connection to both this movie and perhaps to just a Batman character generally?
Okay, well, I have to start with, unfortunately, the 1997 George Clooney Batman and Robin. That was my Batman.
Oh, no.
I was 6 years old and we had it on a VCR, and it was just something that I'd watch over and over and over again. And I don't think it was so much that I loved George Clooney as Batman. It was just the whole range of characters, like Uma Thurman, Poison Ivy, Arnold Schwarzenegger as Mr. Freeze. It was just a really fun movie.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when Batman Begins was released in 2005, I was a freshman in high school, and I don't think that I saw this in movie theaters. I think this was a film that my family ordered through the Netflix DVD service, and so we were able to hold on to it for like a week or 2 weeks or whatever the time was, and we just watched it over and over and over again. And I think if you grew up interested in James Bond or the Three Musketeers, Cape Crusaders, or even like Blade Runner, like just, an aesthetic movie, then this film, which was an adult version for me, right? I'm used to like I said, the kind of the George Clooney cartoonish aspect. This was like, oh, this is a serious story. And this is a story where we're going to really dive into who is Batman and why does he do what he does and what's his family look like and what's Gotham, right? Like how do we build out a world so we can understand what is Batman fighting for? And so this was just it was like an elevation of a story that I was already familiar with. And I mean, with Christopher Nolan directing it, then it was just so well done, right?
Yeah, totally. Shout out too to Netflix DVD subscription. I think at one point I was up to 5 discs at a time, which is kind of crazy because I would go through like TV series that way. But yeah, I agree with all of your takes on the Batman character, the franchise. Yeah, I don't know. It always just, I liked that it was darker too. Although I guess the Michael Keaton one, because Tim Burton directed, there was some darkness to it, but it also was, like you said, it was goofy, which it inherited from, the Batman TV series with Adam West. And, there was a lot of camp. And I think they pulled some of that into the Michael Keaton ones. Whereas, yeah, Batman Begins feels like an adult Batman story. It obviously resonated with a lot of people because it did revive the franchise and it's done very well. So a couple other fun facts I found. To avoid leaks, the movie was called initially The Intimidation Game. I guess they did that not just among the writers, but also with the cast and crew. Apparently, Christian Bale hated his uncomfortable Batman costume so much. Many believe it actually helped his performance because he was perpetually in a bad mood during the shoots. This is what the internet tells me. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to know if that's true or not, but it might have contributed to his voice, despite my being a fan of the movie and this entire franchise with the 2 sequels that follow. Yeah, the Batman voice he dons is like, it gets rougher and harder to understand with each successive movie. So maybe this is why, because he was just uncomfortable. Although Christian Bale performed many of his own stunts, he wasn't allowed anywhere near the Batmobile, or the Tumbler as it's called in this one. While shooting in Chicago, a person accidentally crashed into the Batmobile. A driver, he said he hit the car in a state of panic because he believed it to be an invading alien spacecraft. So make of that what you will. This one I didn't find, but I looked for after rewatching it. But the piano sequence Bruce plays to open the Batcave consists of 3 pairs of notes. So it's D, E, D, E, and G, A. So you might want to try that on your piano at home, see if the door to a Batcave opens up. And then the last one I had was when Christian Bale and Liam Neeson were fighting on the frozen lake. This is when Bruce is still training with Ra's al Ghul and the League of Shadows. They could hear the ice cracking beneath their feet. And apparently the next day, the lake they were on had completely melted. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, kind of scary. They should have probably done a little bit more recon before they did that with 2 of their stars, but it all worked out. Any other fun facts that you found and want to share?
So Cillian Murphy auditioned for the role of Batman, and obviously he didn't get it, but they liked him so much that they slotted him into the film. So an interesting, what if?
Yeah.
And so I haven't actually seen the film, but Christian Bale, just 5 months before Batman Begins started filming, was in The Machinist, and he was down to 121 pounds.
Yeah.
So he had to bulk up incredibly fast. And apparently there's a number of phone calls between Christopher Nolan and Christian Bale where, Nolan is like, are you going to be ready? And Bale says, oh yeah, without a doubt. And then would just house like so much food following the call, so he got into the right shape, but I can't imagine, that turnaround as a performer.
Yeah. Well, he's kind of become our, at least, he's older now, but when I was growing up, he was like my generation's. There are very few actors who did what he did physically in terms of the commitment to the role, gaining weight, losing weight. So amazing. Let's get to some favorite. I put scenes and quotes for this one because Nolan's style here in this film is he cuts so quickly and there's so many scenes that it was hard to, pin them down to this specific scene. So some of these are actually combinations of, perhaps 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 different moments in the film just for brevity's sake. But I've got Bruce training with Ra's al Ghul in the League of Shadows. This is just, what I'm adding on to it, but he ultimately destroys their temple. Bruce returns to Gotham after his training and arrives at Wayne Enterprises' board meeting. Bruce meets Lucius Fox, selects his gadgets, suits up, builds the Batcave with Alfred. That whole, this is several scenes, but that whole process. We've got Bruce visiting Jim Gordon's office. And this is before he is commissioner. And he makes let's call it a less than elegant getaway from the police station because he's still kind of, feeling out his suit. He's learning how to be Batman. It's far from perfect. Batman introduces himself to the world, in a sense, by foiling Carmine Falcone and his gang's drug shipment. Batman meets Scarecrow, Cillian Murphy, as you just mentioned, who gasses Batman and sets him on fire. And then there's the car chase between Batman, where he's in the Tumbler. We kind of see how the Tumbler works, what its capabilities are, that whole thing where he's getting chased by police officers. That was really cool. There's the sequence where the Narrows, so Gotham's water supply, is poisoned. Finally, Rachel discovers Bruce is Batman. And actually, I missed one. Sorry. This is the final fight between, how could I miss this one? This is where Batman fights Ra's al Ghul on the train as they're sort of, barreling towards Wayne Enterprises building. That was a lot. And it's a 2 hour and 20-minute movie or something. There's obviously a lot to cover. Any of those meet your definition of a favorite scene?
Yeah. So you pinpointed a couple, and then I'll add one final one. In preparing for this podcast, then we watched the film multiple times. And my favorite scene kind of transformed into what scene am I looking forward to the most? And I was surprised by how it turned to kind of quiet moments. So when Bruce visits Jim Gordon's office and Batman is discussing or bringing up the topic of, how are we going to stop the corruption going on in Gotham? And he's got a stapler pointed to the back of Gordon's head. And Gordon, of course, thinks that it's a gun, right? So he's tense and he's nervous. And Gordon responds with, "You're just one man." And Batman says, "Now we're 2." And Gordon responds, "We." And then the fight and the chase scene ensues. And I think on a rewatch, it's just really interesting to see Batman with his team and to see the moment when Gordon realizes that, wait, I'm kind of part of the team, even though I might not have asked for it, right? But Batman, he trusts him and he's been watching him, and Batman's really good at watching what's going on in Gotham, right? And he can see through Gordon and he wants him to help out. And I think what Nolan does really well in the film is, you get to see when Batman is in trouble, then who's going to help Batman? And Gordon is one of these guys. So That's one of my favorite scenes. I think a second one, you mentioned when Batman is foiling Falcone's, gang, the drug shipment at the docks. If you put yourself in the villain's POV, you don't see a whole lot of Batman. You see flashes, right? Like glimpses. He's coming down from the ceiling and then he's gone. And so that scene where he's snatching people back into the darkness, that's scary. And I really like the way that this whole scene is done. And then, of course, you get a bit of a comedy break when one of the bad guys screams, where are you? And he whispers, like, here. and that's just really great. The final scene I wanted to talk about is after Batman captures Falcone and then the bat signal goes up, then there's a scene where Batman's standing on the edge of a building with a really long cape on overlooking the city of Gotham. And it's just this really epic shot. And he's just in stone. He's like a gargoyle looking over the city. That's where, as an audience, we get to see Batman exist, right? We get to see him observing and being the protector that the average person on the street looking up is not going to see him, right? He's not Superman flying through the sky. This is somebody who's meant to be kind of in the shadows, and that's how he wants to be a protector.
Yeah.
So I really like that scene.
Gosh, so many things you said that I want to respond to. Probably don't have time to do them all, but your comment about the effectiveness of, having him come out from the shadows. I mean, on top of it being, that's what a bat does. And that's kind of what the Batman character has always used to his advantage. I think some of the most successful films in film history that are thriller or horror, it's so much more effective when you don't show the monster or the villain or whatever it is that, you're trying to use to evoke fear. I mean, I think Jaws did this well in that you really didn't see the whole shark, right, until the very, very end of the movie. Sci-fi fans, I mean, the first Alien and then even Aliens, although they showed much more of it there. But in the first Alien, you go through a lot of the film and you don't see what the alien actually looks like. And I think that's really effective here as well, where Bruce says at several points here, he's taking what he's afraid of and he's kind of, one, overcoming it, but two, using it against his enemies, to invoke fear in them. And then, your comment about him saying, I'm here. I think it might be a callback, to Michael Keaton's Batman, where I think at one point someone says, "Who are you?" And he does it in the Batman. He's like, "I'm Batman." So I think it's a nice little callback to that, I think. Yeah, those are all great ones. I mean, again, in a movie like this, it's really hard to choose just one. I would say that for me, I love the setup of all these, action hero movies, superhero movies. I like the setup of just a common citizen or common person becoming the hero. And so where Bruce meets Lucius Fox, he's going through his gadgets, suiting up, he's building the Bat Cave with Alfred and getting all of that set up. I really like that process. And again, it's not one scene. I think it's several scenes, but that entire, sequence is really cool to me.
It's like the first 45 minutes of the movie.
Yeah. I feel like I have to insert this in because the kid in me would not allow my adult self to talk about Batman, but not talk about his gadgets. What is your favorite Bat gadget from this movie?
Okay, so favorite gadget in The Dark Knight, the next film, then we are introduced to the Bat Pod, and that gadget was so cool to see. And we don't get there without the Batmobile or the tumbler, right? Which we've already talked about.
Right.
But so I have to respond with the tumbler, mostly because the ideas that it generates for the rest of the franchise are just so cool.
Yeah. I wanted to say the tumbler. I still think actually my favorite Batmobile it's probably, Tumbler is certainly my top three because there's animated ones, but to me, it's hard to not look at the Michael Keaton Batmobile as like, that's my Batmobile. I think the one from the Adam West TV series was also really cool looking and retro looking, but yeah, Tumbler has to be the top. I wanted to zag and go a different way only because I feel like the obvious answer is the Tumbler, and I think that's the right answer.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go completely opposite direction in terms of size and scale. I like the Batarang, which is his throwing star. I guess it's a combination of like a ninja star and a boomerang.
Those are also on my list. Yeah.
It was my favorite because it looks cool, and I like the idea of them. From a practical standpoint, I'm not sure how efficient those were because you see a scene where he's making them.
Oh yeah,
it looks like it would take him like 7 days to make one.
He has not ordered 10,000 of them like they did for the mask. These are handmade by Bruce Wayne.
I just can't imagine. He's, socialite Bruce Wayne by day. He's Batman at night. I'm assuming he's staying in shape and training in between. How is he making enough batarangs to the point where he's just like not even thinking about it as he's throwing these things? If it took me that long to make them, which again, based on the movie, what they're showing us, it would take hours, if not days to make just one. I think I'd be asking villains like, hey, either you stop doing what you're doing or I might consider throwing this. And even then I might really think twice before throwing it. So that was my favorite just because it was cool looking and I liked the idea, but it did present this sort of practical conundrum. Like, I don't know how you'd actually make that work. And in the movie, he throws a lot of them. Like he's throwing them at light bulbs, at people. There's like no discretion in terms of what he's using them for.
Well, and I think it's for two ideas for me. One, he doesn't use them in a lethal way, right? This is Batman. Like, but two, is he going around collecting these? Like after these, I
hope so. I really hope. Like that's Robin's job. He needed a Robin just to, hey, your job is just to go around and collect the ones around Gotham that I've thrown.
So funny.
So let's move on to estate planning opportunities. So we wanted to focus on directed trusts, and we wanted to do it through Alfred's character and Lucius Fox's character. First, it's important to establish what a traditional trust is, and then we can sort of look at why a directed trust is different, how it works, and why it might be appropriate here in the Wayne family's case. In a traditional trust, you usually have three roles. You have the trustor or grantor, that's the person creating the trust. You have the trustee, that's the person responsible for overseeing the trust assets and managing the trust and making sure that the trust terms are fulfilled. And then you have the beneficiary, who's the person who actually receives the benefit from the trust. So in a traditional trust, the trustee role is solely responsible, as I mentioned, for asset management, trust distributions, and administrative tasks. The difference with a directed trust is that it divides those responsibilities among different individuals. Typically, there are three roles. There's the administrative trustee, there's the distribution advisor, and then there's the investment advisor. And if you wouldn't mind just kind of walking us through what each of those roles typically mean, and we can then talk about how Alfred and Lucius fit these roles.
Sure. So the administrative trustee holds legal title to the trust assets, but they don't have the power to make investment or distribution decisions. The administrative trustee, the role is still primarily administrative in nature. They're in charge of record keeping for the trust. They'll handle taxes, and they will execute transactions once instructed by the trust advisors, by the distribution advisor, and by the investment advisor. So they're still handling the administrative functions of the trust, but they're just working in tandem with the other advisors. Mm-hmm. So the distribution advisor, similar to what it sounds like, they're in charge of making decisions regarding the distributions to the beneficiaries. Whereas the investment advisor, then their role is to manage the trust investment portfolio and direct the trustee in regards to buying, selling, holding, the investment of trust assets.
Yeah, exactly right. And so rather than having all of these responsibilities being handled by one person or one role in a traditional trust where the trustee does this, we're basically just, directed trust splits these off into multiple roles. We're focusing mainly on the distribution advisor and investment advisor. And those individuals are typically known to the family. They may be family members or other professional advisors. Common reasons to utilize directed trust, this is not an exhaustive list, but control, right? So the trustor can appoint specific experts or trusted family members to manage certain aspects of the trust. Particularly with unique assets like a family business or real estate. We know that Wayne Enterprises and Thomas and Martha, they have a very unique company. So having a degree of control so that you don't just appoint somebody who you're not certain can oversee and take on these responsibilities as trustee may be beneficial. Flexibility is another reason. It allows the trust to hold concentrated or liquid assets that a traditional corporate trustee might be unwilling to do because there are rules under California law for diversification. So again, going back just generally, a trustee's job is to maintain and invest and grow the assets. So general investment principles say that you should be well diversified, because if one industry goes down, then another one might be up. And so you'll mitigate losses. You can have flexibility with the directed trust to concentrate your position. And so here, for example, the trust can hold a position in a family business that's more concentrated than in a normal situation. And again, Wayne Enterprises as an example, wouldn't that be nice if Thomas Wayne, right, if he held a majority interest in Wayne Enterprises, which I assume he did as the founder, then I think he would probably want his descendants and whatever trust he set up to also be able to hold a concentrated position and not be forced to sell off or basically divest the trust of its interest in Wayne Enterprises so that the family company can stay in the family, so to speak. As we said earlier about kind of specialized expertise, you can have specialized management. Directed trust ensures that complex or specialized assets are managed by the right individuals with the specific expertise required. So here we're going to look at that through Lucius's role, but you might have a general trustee that you're saying, hey, I know you are well suited to manage trust assets generally, but are you well suited to manage this specific asset in my family? And then as I mentioned earlier, which we don't have time to get into today, there are jurisdictional benefits to a directed trust. So naming a directed trustee, right, usually a trust company of some sort, in a state with favorable trust laws, Delaware, South Dakota, Nevada, the trust can then take advantage of enhanced privacy and other tax benefits under those laws. So again, that's just an introduction quickly on what a directed trust does, what it offers, why some people might use it. Let's look at why a directed trust might be a good fit for the Wayne family. As we've mentioned, when this movie takes place in the beginning, at the start of the movie, Bruce is a minor. Thomas and Martha Wayne are murdered, and he is still a child. Legally, he's not 18. He's a minor, and he wouldn't have had the legal capacity to take on these roles. Even as an adult, right, we see he's busy being a socialite. He's got to maintain. I don't know what he was doing, I think, prior to his taking on, like, I'm going to save Gotham. Maybe he's just hanging around.
Well, we know he got kicked out of Princeton.
Yeah, there we go. He was clearly, troubled and sort of not focused, maybe. So he was, once we see him and he's on his path to becoming Batman and wanting to do good and save Gotham, he's busy being a socialite during the day. He's probably a philanthropist. I'm assuming he's making charitable donations and other investments. And of course, he's busy being Batman. So even if as an adult, Bruce Wayne is probably not the best fit to be managing his own trust. There's also an immediate need for Wayne Enterprises, right? So I think we see, is it William Earl, who is the CEO? I forget the actor. It's a character actor who plays him. He says after Bruce's parents die, he's like, "Don't worry, we're gonna keep the keys to the empire for you." So someone needs to keep Wayne Enterprises running, right? Its direction to carry out the vision, hopefully that Thomas Wayne had. And there's also a need for whatever trust was set up for Bruce and for his benefit, whatever assets are in it. Again, presumably it's primarily Wayne Enterprises shares and other assets. There's a need for financial and investment advice. So someone needs to take these roles immediately. If you look around Thomas and Martha Wayne's, circle, it doesn't look like there was a whole lot of people they probably trusted, and there's no other family members we know of. So we know that Alfred and Lucius were very close to the family, at least to the father, and they would be good choices to play certain roles. And so let's take a deeper look at that. And first, any thoughts on or comments on, just why a directed trust, for the reasons I mentioned, and maybe perhaps more, maybe a good fit for the Wayne family?
I mean, I think you covered pretty much everything involved. It's a situation where you're going to need somebody who's going to work well with Bruce at different stages of life. And then you're going to need somebody who can help with the business aspect. And it's going to be difficult to find somebody who can do all of that. Yeah. Right. So let's maybe try to specialize a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's focus on Alfred. So you and I were talking, and we feel like he would be a really great fit as distribution advisor. I think, and we've covered on this podcast series before, just what a guardianship is generally and how it works in a couple of other episodes. But Alfred presumably was Bruce's guardian, legal guardian once his parents died, right? He was already living with them. He was, basically raised Bruce. So I don't think there's any question that he knows the Wayne family well. He also knows Bruce very personally because, again, he was essentially a father figure in his life. And if you look at what a distribution advisor is intended to do, which is that role is intended to approve or deny distributions from the trust. And it's tough to do that, or at least it's tougher to do that when you don't have a clear understanding of who the beneficiary is or what their needs are. Here, Alfred, he's clearly got a personal knowledge of Bruce's, both as a child, I guess, and growing up, his lifestyle and his needs. But I think all the more so as Bruce is transforming into Batman, now that Alfred is, Bruce has looped him into, hey, I'm Batman. I'm pursuing this and I'm on this journey now. I think he's got a really intimate look at what his needs are. And so I don't know how they're structuring all of Bruce's purchases, whether it's a Wayne Enterprise purchase, because he's clearly burning through cash, right? You don't just build a Batcave. I would think the Batcave probably is a personal, right? That's probably a personal expense because it has to do with Wayne Manor. But all of this money that's not coming, assuming it's not coming out from Wayne Enterprises as some type of company expense, I mean, these would have to be personal expenses that Bruce is having. And so those expenses have to come, the funds for those expenses have to come from somewhere. And if we assume that Martha and Thomas set up a bunch of irrevocable trusts of different types for Bruce's well-being as he's getting older and as an adult, those funds have to come out of there. And yeah, who better to approve or deny or kind of be the gatekeeper, I guess, for the distributions that come from that trust other than Alfred. Last thing I'll say here is Alfred tells Bruce at one point, I think it's when he got chased by police through the city of Gotham in the Tumbler. And I think Alfred is saying, this has gone way beyond what you initially seem to want to do. Now it's gotten reckless. That's his concern. He tells Bruce, don't destroy your father's name. And basically he doesn't want Bruce to destroy, but rather he wants him to preserve his father's legacy. And that's very akin to what a distribution advisor is intended to do, because their task is to preserve the trustor's financial legacy. I think there's a lot of parallels here between Alfred and the typical role of what a distribution advisor does. And I think he'd be a great fit. And then I also want to just point out, clearly this is an intention because he knows the Wayne family well, Alfred, that is. There was some comment at one point, I think he made it, that Wayne Manor, right, Bruce's home, was passed down through 6 generations of Wayne family descendants. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens because there was intentional estate planning, intentional tax planning. And I think it also happens because you had the right people appointed in the right position. So anyway, any other comments you have to add to why Alfred would be, I think, a great fit as distribution advisor for Bruce?
I think what comes to mind is one of the most famous quotes from the movie, which comes from Thomas Wayne. Why do we follow Bruce? So we can learn to pick ourselves back up again. And with Alfred having a background and a deep understanding of the family history, as you've said, then he's also here to provide, support. If something's going wrong for Bruce, he can kind of get him back on track, right? And we see this in directive trusts, where maybe within the trust terms, and there's been some provisions where you said you kind of build in some guidelines for the advisor to understand what's important from the grantor's perspective. And do they want the beneficiary to maybe hold certain values or, avoid certain behavior? And so, I mean, kind of as you've already pointed out, like Alfred just has a really deep understanding of what's the goal here. And if something's going wrong, how do we get Bruce back on track? How do we protect him? And there's just constant communication between them too, right? Who's always there for Bruce, right? It's Alfred.
Yeah.
Who's picking him up when he's been poisoned. Who's picking him up on the jet, from the League of Shadows. Like he's there and he's holding that communication strong, and it's really important.
Yeah, I think when he gets gassed and lit on fire by Scarecrow, I think Batman, doesn't he call him? He sets off some type of like locator, GPS locator. And then he says, I think he literally says like, Alfred, save me. It's like Alfred's taken on a huge role. And yeah, to just echo what you're saying, when someone has passed away, their estate plan, the terms of the trust or estate plan that they've set up, that really becomes the only guidance they've left, either someone in the trustee role or a third-party advisor or your family with. And so what you're trying to do here with this distribution advisor, especially when it's someone like Alfred who knows the family so well and knows Bruce so well, And it's kind of evolving with Bruce, right? Because obviously Bruce's needs have changed dramatically, even from child to adult, but from adult to now he's escaped crusader. Wouldn't it be great if your distribution advisor or other advisors within the trust can kind of fill in the gaps where the trust, right? The terms of the trust, your legal documents are silent or can't say anymore. You have someone who knows the beneficiary in a way that sometimes just can't be elaborated or described in a legal document very succinctly or well. So let's move on to Lucius. We think he's a great investment advisor. We start the movie where Bruce I don't think he knows who Lucius is. Yeah, he meets him later during the movie. We find out that Lucius was on the board of Wayne Enterprises at one point, was removed. I think that was by William Earl, or at least someone in William Earl's camp. Again, he, like Alfred, because of his connection, we find out that he also knew the Wayne family, Thomas Wayne particularly, and we're going to find out as we watch the movie that he knows the company very well. He now runs the Applied Sciences Department, which is a research and development subdivision of Wayne Enterprises. And, it's convenient because just to move the plot along and move the movie along and to provide sort of this endless well of tech and gear for Batman, Lucius is in this role. But if you take it, if you look at it from a practical perspective and assume that in this real world, this is Lucius's role, then he does have very, very, very specialized expertise on the investments that the trust might hold, right? Maybe and maybe it's the investments that the trust holds an interest in Wayne Enterprises, which in turn owns a lot of investments. If they're needing new technology and cutting edge tech, which Bruce seems to be able to get a hold of, right? They're ordering from overseas, they're ordering from companies, using shell companies and all these other elaborate schemes to get the gear they need. One would think that there are some investments in startup technology companies, other companies that, again, just your average trustee who maybe invests and broadly diversifies is not going to know. And so Lucius, I think, for all those reasons, is just a great fit for investment advisor. Anything you want to add to that in terms of, I can't really even think of another character in the movie that we were introduced to that would fit this role.
No, I think he's the best fit. I mean, especially if we're going to keep Earl in kind of the villain box, right? Because Earl definitely, he might have an understanding of the business, but he does not have Bruce's best interest at heart.
Exactly.
Right. So this is somebody who, checks both of those boxes, but also, stepping back, like we wouldn't want Alfred to step in and be in charge of this part and manage these trust assets, right? So you need somebody like Lucius with this specialized knowledge.
Yeah. I think Alfred and Lucius each bring a perspective that the other can't have, right? Alfred grew up with Bruce, raised him. Lucius didn't even meet him till he was an adult. And so he's not going to have that historical background or that family background to know Bruce in a way that you would want your distribution advisor, for example, to know your beneficiary. And then, like you said, it's clear Alfred's tending to Wayne Manor. He's saving Bruce from other things. I would imagine that when Bruce was getting into trouble, Alfred was there to get him out of those situations as well. So he's wearing a lot of hats, and it has nothing to do with applied sciences or any of the technology that Lucius has an intimate knowledge of. So they definitely complement one another. So yeah, that's what we wanted to point out, is just how a directed trust works, why this is probably a very good fit. But having said that, directed trusts, obviously, they're not for everybody. There are, costs to establishing them and administering them successfully. So, as with all the strategies we talk about and kind of introduce, guidance from a qualified attorney or other professional advisor is critical to making sure that if somebody's interested in the directed trust and how it works and wants to employ it in their estate plan, they should seek qualified help. Let's move on to two other topics. We want to also cover these quickly because I got the idea just from, as I was rewatching the movie, Bruce at one point says to Alfred, good thing I left everything to you. I think it's when he's coming back from the League of Shadows training and they're on the plane. It just got me wondering, how might this actually happen? Because Alfred clearly is not an actual member of the Wayne family, right? He's not a lineal descendant or related in some way other than, yes, he's a family member in the sense that they love him. And in fact, Bruce, at some point when he's, I think, lashing out at Alfred for something, he says, Alfred, it's not your family. So we know that to be true. So the question in my mind was, if Alfred is not an actual Wayne family member. And presumably, Bruce's parents left the majority of their assets to Bruce directly. What are some situations or some legal options for Bruce if to actually make it such that he would leave everything to Alfred? Because again, it sounds like everything would have been left to Bruce, and perhaps Bruce's descendants, right, might have been contemplated. And so how would this happen where Alfred might even take in this situation?
Yeah, well, one option is Alfred could have been named as the contingent beneficiary.
Mm-hmm.
The idea here is that if the primary beneficiary of the trust is unable to or no longer exist when the trust is settled and is ready to distribute assets, you can identify individuals or entities who would inherit in that situation. So it kind of serves as like a backup plan. It's also been described as a total disaster clause, right? Where like all the planning, everything that you kind of designed in the body of the trust or in your estate planning documents, if there's problems, at least there's somebody who could inherit. And so this backup plan ensures that the trusters' assets are distributed according to their wishes. Like I said, even if everybody else is unavailable.
Mm-hmm.
So this helps to avoid disputes among what's supposed to happen to the trust assets at that point.
Right.
It's a good backup plan to have.
Yeah. And I think in our client scenarios, right, when we're working with our clients to come up with who their contingent beneficiaries are, it's crucial to, understand that every situation is different. So in the Wayne family, for example, where doesn't appear, at least based on what we know in this movie, I think in larger like Batman lore, he might have even had a sister, I think, in some version of the comics. But here we presume he's an only child. It doesn't appear that Thomas and Martha had, other siblings or things. The likelihood of this disaster clause or this contingent beneficiary provision taking place in the Wayne family is actually very high. So in their case, the Wayne family, when they were, Thomas and Martha, when they're creating their estate plan, they would be prudent to put a lot of thought into who their contingent beneficiaries are, because there's a likelihood that and possibility that Bruce, if he either predeceased them or dies untimely, that the assets need to go to somebody else. For clients of ours who have, let's say you have someone with 6 children and those children have children, if you want your assets to just pass through your family line, maybe this contingent beneficiary discussion or provision requires a little less detail and tailoring, because at the end of the day, it's pretty remote possibility that none of your descendants are going to survive you. So again, in the Wayne family, Bruce is an only child, not other members of the Wayne family. So Alfred, I think, given all of his commitments and long-standing relationship with the Wayne family, would probably be a contingent beneficiary. The other topic, as far as how Alfred could possibly be a beneficiary of the Thomas and Martha Wayne, estate, is that Bruce's parents, with contingent beneficiaries, it would have been them who would have needed to, when they're creating their estate plan, write Alfred into it. We know Bruce can't have a part in that because he's a child at that point, right? And perhaps they even created their estate plan before he was born. We don't know. So let's say they had not done so. They didn't write Alfred into their estate plan. Is there a legal way or option that Bruce can take as an adult to still select Alfred as a beneficiary and leave everything to him?
If Thomas and Martha had given Bruce a power of appointment, which is legal authority granted to Bruce to decide who would receive assets from the estate or from the trust, then he would be able to exercise this power to distribute trust assets to Alfred if he named Alfred. But from a higher level point of view, when crafting the powers of appointment, then Thomas and Martha would have wanted to keep in mind different ways that power of appointment could be prepared. So there's a general power of appointment, and then there's a special or a limited power of appointment. And a general power of appointment allows the power holder to appoint assets to anybody, including themselves. So this is like the most flexible power that they could have given Bruce. There's also a special, or sometimes called a limited power of appointment, which is more restrictive in that you limit the choice of appointees to a specific group of people. And this will exclude the power holder, or in this case would exclude Bruce. So they could say, we only want you to be able to appoint assets to our descendants or family members of ours, or Bruce, if you get married, to your spouse, or maybe just to charities, right? But they could also craft the power of appointment to identify anybody, in which case it could be exercisable to Alfred.
For maximum tax efficiency. These are lifetime trusts for Bruce. So they would have needed to give him a power of appointment that it couldn't have been so restricted. And in the Hangover episode, we talk a little bit about the tax implications of a power of appointment. And it's very key. And so usually with a lifetime trust that's intended to go on for multiple generations and be efficient from estate tax and generation skipping transfer tax, otherwise known as GST tax, usually you have to use a limited power of appointment. Presumably it's a limited power of appointment, but it can't be so limited to where it was only descendants, right? Because if that's the power that Bruce has, that he can only appoint his limited power of appointment among descendants of the Wayne family, then that would have excluded Alfred. So given that, he was saying it in jest on the plane, I think, in the movie, but let's just say he's serious and he did leave everything to Alfred, then I think we have to back into the idea that his power of appointment was a little bit broader. So maybe it was to any person, not just a family member or descendant. And often we also attach, in charitable entities or non-charitable entities. Those are also common options. So yeah, these are between the contingent beneficiary and this idea of a general or limited power of appointment. These are some ways that Alfred could have become a beneficiary of the Wayne estate. And I think the difference between the two there are just that Bruce has power over one, if we're talking about power of appointment, versus in a contingent beneficiary situation, that would have been something that Bruce's parents would have needed to establish and write into their trust. Two more points on the power of appointment is just there's a distinction between a lifetime power and what's called a testamentary power, otherwise basically describing a power that can be exercised only upon one's passing, at one's death. And so how this would happen, how is a power of appointment exercised? It's generally done through a standalone written instrument. And if it's during your lifetime, you could put in writing, I exercise my power of appointment, and to whoever your appointees are. But it can also be done in a will. So, when we say testamentary or taking place at death, it's not like Bruce in his dying breath has to say, I leave everything to Alfred. He will have, during his lifetime, before he died, put in place, whether it's a will or some other standalone document, made clear his intention to actually exercise his power in favor of Alfred. So that's probably how it would have taken place. That's a discussion on how Alfred would have been a beneficiary of the Wayne estate. Again, a couple options there in terms of how that might have happened. As a final discussion topic, you and I wanted to just highlight recent legislation. And I say recent, it was passed on July 4th of 2025, but the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. I don't know. People are calling it the OBBBA. People are calling it OB3. We will stick with OBBBA and try to say that without completely tripping over our words here.
I've also heard OBBA. So, it's just continuing to develop.
Yeah. That is legislation effective on July 4th, 2025, as I mentioned. It makes significant changes to the U.S. tax code along with other areas. We're not going to go and highlight or summarize all of its changes. There's a lot. We just wanted to call out a couple of key points from an estate planning perspective. So the OBBBA, quote unquote, permanently extends certain individual tax provisions from this is the prior act, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the TCJA of 2017. So basically, effective January 1st of next year of 2026, the OBBBA increases federal estate, gift, and generation skipping transfer tax exemptions to a certain amount per individual, indexes it for inflation. So as a reminder, where we are currently under current law, it's the estate and gift and GST exemptions are all $13.99 million in 2025. Lucy, what does it go up to in 2026 as a result of the OBBBA?
Yeah, so in the coming year, then it'll be raised to $15 million per individual. And for a married couple, this translates to effective exemption of $30 million.
Yeah. Why this is important is because coming into, as the OBBBA was being decided on, under this TCJA, as I mentioned, of 2017, there was a sunset that would have happened, which would have basically reverted all of these exemptions down to $7 million. And so this is a big deal in the sense that it increases it to $15 million starting in 2026. It's indexed for inflation. So each year it'll increase incrementally to adjust for inflation. But it is permanent now. So first, it takes off the table this idea that we were going to revert back, which would have affected clients, our clients, high net worth and ultra high net worth clients, because if they had not used their exemption yet, they would have needed to likely use it before they lose it, so to speak. And that urgency has now primarily been taken off the table in terms of they can use it if they'd like, but they're not going to lose their exemption starting in 2026. It also keeps the annual exclusion, which is you get an annual exclusion of $19,000 under current law. That's going to stay the same. So you can make a gift and not have to file a gift tax return to any individual per person per year, $19,000. So Bruce's parents, Thomas and Martha, for example, if they were still living, each of them could make $19,000 gift to Bruce. So it'd be $38,000 per year. And that would stay the same under the OBBBA. It also keeps the top estate tax rate the same. So it's currently 40%, and that's going to stay the same as well going into 2026. And I say, coming back to it, I say it's quote unquote permanent in that it doesn't have a sunset date. So unlike the TCJA, which I mentioned, without the new legislation, it would have sunset, and on January 1st, 2026, if that was the only law still standing, these exemptions would have dropped from $13.99 million to roughly $7 million. This OBBBA does not have a sunset date. It's going to continue on until further or future legislation by Congress and the then acting president. So it is more difficult to change it at this point. And so they are permanent. But again, permanent only means until the next law takes place. So like many of our, high net worth, ultra high net worth clients, I think Bruce's advisors would have definitely been aware of the OBBBA. I mean, it was big news heading into this year. Like many of our clients, though, the increase to these exemptions, from 13.99 to 15 million per person, it would have been helpful and meaningful, but they're probably of nominal value to Bruce, right? I mean, I think we know him to be a billionaire. I think historically in the comic book, in that franchise, he's a billionaire. I don't know if he's, by today's standards, supposed to be a trillionaire, but having an extra $1 million of exemption and indexing it by probably several $100,000 each year for inflation would be helpful to him if he leveraged it right with the right strategies, but probably not groundbreaking. I mean, he probably needs to be doing high-end estate planning regardless of how this law turned out. But nonetheless, still important to know. Any other comments about the OBBBA? I'm proud of myself because I don't think I tripped over that, but I've also said it very slowly. So.
Yeah, very smooth. I mean, the only other comment is that there's been plenty of people who were under the impression that they'd fully used up their exemption, and now they might have a little bit more.
Yeah.
So, reach back out to counsel.
Exactly. Let's end with our verdict for the movie. Guilty equals you enjoyed the movie but feel guilty about it for any reason. Not guilty means that you either disliked the movie or loved it. In either case, it cannot possibly be a guilty pleasure. I think for me, definitely a not guilty. It was, again, so cool at that time. And still, even on the rewatch, I think a lot of it holds up. But yeah, at that time, just so cool seeing, my favorite superhero character getting revived in a way that, we didn't even know, I think, how that it was going to lead to 2 sequels. And then we didn't have time to get into this, but Heath Ledger's performance as the Joker in the next one. So yeah, for me, not guilty, no question. How about for you?
I think for me, it's not guilty, but it's a little bit more of a soft not guilty, just because exactly what you're hinting on. The Dark Knight is so good, but again, we're not going to get there without this movie.
Yeah.
So love this movie and love what it sets up too.
Awesome. Well, what we've learned today is even if you're the Cape Crusader who trained with the League of Shadows, you are not above quality estate planning and the potential benefits of a directed trust, particularly if you have complex or unique assets or desire greater control and flexibility over the management of your family trust. And also, you should be aware of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which was signed into law on July 4th, 2025. Lucy, thanks so much for joining me. I had a lot of fun with this discussion. Hope you did as well. And who knows, we have 2 sequels we know are out there, and maybe we do get to Heath Ledger's Joker and give it the credit that it's due. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Hans.
I'm Hans Young with my guest, Farella Family Wealth Associate Lucy Campbell, and you've been listening to The Verdict, Estate Planning Through Film, brought to you by the Private Client Group at Farella, Braun, and Martel. Thanks very much for joining us, and keep watching movies.